Armin is an artist who began his career with photography, capturing images of the at once most striking but also most commonplace settings of our contemporary world. Large format images as visually powerful signs. But at the same time, multi-year projects have emerged that are transdisciplinary, for which Armin Linke has collaborated with various scientists. His work thus represents an interface. I can take this away, maybe you understand me better. His work thus represents an interface between scientific research and artistic practice. It developed from a collaboration with very different institutes, such as a Center for Statistical Mechanics and Complexity, or the Department or Media Art 3D at the Hochschule für Gestaltung Karlsruhe. This was what happened for the film project Flocking. The focus of this cinematic work on flocks of birds is the range of topics between collective behavior, complex systems and self-organized structures, as well as the difficulty to differentiate between an artistic and a scientific image production. At the moment, Armin Linke is also artist in residence for 3 years at the famous Kunsthistorisches Institut in Florence. I believe he's going to talk about it in a minute. He is also artist in residence at CERN in Geneva. I just would like to mention also his film, Alpi, which is shown today too at Hotel Castel at the cinema, I think in continuous loop. Here a quote of the artist about his film, about Alpi. In the Europe of today, the Alps are a hotbed for modernity and its illusion. So he's talking now about image capital.
So, thank you. I will present different projects, and maybe at the end come to this project Image Capital to show different strategies how photography, as it's maybe the main medium with which I work, can be presented in interaction with the public in exhibitions. Here we are at the Triennale in Milano, about 20 years ago, in an exhibition developed with the activist group Stalker, where we developed these wheels that were kind of Memorex index cards, or maybe Lanterna Magica, that the public could push through the space and with its, in a certain way, activate with its materiality the interaction with the images. Sometimes also some accidents happen. The wheels hit each other. So what also interests me is to produce images. Maybe you make fieldworks in faraway areas, bringing a large format camera. But then in the setting of the exhibition, you try to test if this picture can survive these laboratory settings. Here we are at ZKM, Zentrum für Kunst und Medien in Karlsruhe, about 15 years ago. This is the project Phenotypes Limited Forms, developed with Peter Anappe, a developer and software writer from the Sony Laboratory for Artificial Science in Paris. And the idea here was to select 1,000 images from my work and to give them possibility to the public to co-curate the exhibition at the wall, so the public could touch the images and change organically, like give a kind of biological life to the exhibition. But you also could select 8 images, bring them on the table. Each image would have an RFID. What we have also in our passport is antenna barcode system. And the table would recognize which picture and print in real time, let's say a booklet, a Leporello. By the way, we used the printer, the ticket printer of ZKM. That was the most robust printer we had. So the public could take, let's say, the memory of his interaction with the exhibition with himself. The same exhibition could exist in different places. Here we are at the Sao Paulo Biennale, where we reacted to the exhibition space of Oscar Niemeyer and constructing this transporting table. The design was developed also with the students of the HFG Karlsruhe. One of the topics was tagging. So the project was also co-financed by a European science fund at the time. The topic of tagging was quite interesting. The exhibition then went also to, here we are at the Admont Library, Bibliothek from the 16th century. So brought in exactly in the place where the memory of these books were stored for about 400 years, and the idea that the exhibition could allow to print an own book. We then thought with Peter how to make a publication that would represent the whole performatic quality of the installation, and began to look for half a day the 30,000 Leporellos, or the 30,000 sequences that were done by the public in 2 years of exhibitions. And of course, after half a day, we had just headaches. So I thought to develop a new project asking Peter to develop algorithms that would select for us the 30,000 sequences. So in a certain way, the first project was an excuse to make another project to ask what is the black box of algorithms that we use every day when we use, for example, Google Images. But then we were lost in translation because Peter said, well, let's use Markov analysis. That is the basics of statistics. And when he was explaining me the rules of Markov analysis, I simply did understand almost nothing. So we asked Lord Giletti, a graphic designer, to integrate the pictures or the images from my artistic work into the scientific paper of Peter. And at the same time, it was interesting to have another way to, let's say, stroll through the images. And these were the sequences produced by the public in the installation that then were selected for the book published in the final result. Of course, we had also other forms of installations. And you see also the very, let's say, differentiated topology of pictures that I produced in the last 30 years. Another important moment was for me the exchange with a project of Bruno Latour, modesofexistence.org, where he published a book in physical form, but then had the idea to have a website that would work as footnotes to the physical publication. And the question together with the graphic designer Donato Ricci and Christophe Leclerc was how to bring artistic images or videos as footnotes on the website. So I printed about 2,000 images from my archive in A4, and here we are at the Media Lab of Sciences Po in Paris. And for me, it was interesting to see how Bruno Latour would begin to select the images, not from my first, let's say, artistic agenda, but for his own agenda. So in a certain way, how he would reread how the images could be a triggering point for a new discussion, for a new reading. For example, the questions of modes of existence were what is the space of a scientific lab? What is the space of science? Or what is the difference between an archive and a collection? Or how is architecture used to depict a political process? So I was so interested in the result that I asked Bruno if I could use some of his text in an exhibition, and then also asked different others, actors or practitioners, to make the same reading of the images. So I asked Ariella Zulai, Lauren Deston, Jan Zalacevich, Mark Wigley, or Franco Ferinelli to interact in the same process. And the result was an exhibition for the Globale at the Zentrum für Kunst und Medien about 5 years ago, the appearance of that which cannot be seen. And the exhibition worked as a performatic setting, or like a choreography. The setting would change every 2 months for a period of 1 year into the space, creating a kind of garden that you would navigate. So we had a team, Linda van Deurzen, Marta Schwindling, Alina Schmuch, and Jan Kieswetter, with which we recomposed every time, like a theater script, the different topics, the different selections by the actors, and brought them into space. Of course, we had also audio, or here you have Jan Zalacevich, a geologist and secretary of the Anthropocene Working Group, looking at a photograph of the laboratory of the Museum of France that is just set under the Louvre. And here you see an X-ray of a Rembrandt painting, and for example, he says, well, you could look at paintings as a geological moment. If we look at the different strata of the color, different strata of the minerals with which Rembrandt worked, we can have a geological reading of this image. Or on the other side, you had Ariella Zulai speaking about who has the power to have the information on the painting, and how is this power then used in society. The idea was also to have, say, a very theatrical setting that speaks about, let's say, fictionality connected with images from the materiality of reality. And we have had a sound. So the exhibition worked also as a sound piece in space. And here, another venues at the PAC in Milano, Padiglione d'Arte Contemporanea, in the buildings of Ignazio Gardella. Another project was a commission from TBI 21 Academy, a commission that started about 3 years, where we traveled different areas of the world to look at biological and geological resources in the oceans. And the main film or setting was a research or a film edited with material from ROVs, remote operated vehicles that go down to 5,000 meters to look for new biological or geological resources. So we use basically operative images from 2 German institutions, Geomar and Marum. So pictures that were just stored in the servers without any use after the research, but at the same time they were highly costly. I mean, they were basically all images like James Cameron productions that we re-edited them. And the setting was, as the Church of San Lorenzo was not yet ready, in the Ismar Oceanographic Institute, in the X laboratories, where basically you found the materiality of the traces of the science institutions that were looking at the very topics of the exhibitions. So here we worked with the architects Kuhn Malvezzi for the display, and one of the important topics was the legal matter. So looking how Hugo Grotius, with the text that we show here, Mare Liberum, already in the 16th century, defined the water column as a free space. So basically the invention of liberalism. Hugo Grotius was a young lawyer that tried to convince for the Dutch that wanted to reach Indonesia, wanted to convince Spain and Portugal to go through their seas. The Pope gave them the seas, and basically invented this idea that the water circulation and, or for example, fishing in international sea waters is free. And on the other side, with the invention of sonar imaging technologies in the 50s, new geological resources were discovered in the oceans, and so a new legal set was developed by the United Nations. The International Seabed Authority was set up, and the UNCLOS was written, and the geological resources of the sea ground are now under the UNCLOS, and the idea was that when exploitation will begin, industrial countries will have to share the revenues of this exploitation with developing countries. Here we are, the International Seabed Authority. But now the question is, what happens with new biological forms that were discovered, for example, at black smokers, where on one side you have these volcanoes emitting rare earths that are now very useful for the green development of our next cars. And on the other side, you have bacteria that live there and can transform methane, for example, into sugar and energy. This transformation is very interesting for the pharmaceutical industry, and now it's not clear how can you patent this new biological form of life, because where do the bacteria live? Do they live in the 16th century with Mare Liberum, or do they in the water column, in the international water column, or do they live with the geological background? So new legal sets have to be developed. And the question is, how do you create now the visual material to try to explain this kind of new legal settings for this new form of colonization of resources? Here a Switch project. We are at with Image Capital, a project developed with Estelle Blaschke, historians of photography that research long different history of photography, starting, for example, from microfilm in the 1920s. And the picture that you see here is the index card that you have at the entrance of the Kunsthistorisches Institut, the art history research center in Florence. And you have at the very same time the index card, the metadata that allows you to enter, to browse the photographic archive, and you have the video camera. So you have the past and you have the video camera of the closed circuit security system observing you entering it. This project that is again a collaboration, was started with a lecture at Centre Pompidou about 3 years ago, and then developed into an exhibition at the Stuttgart Kunstmuseum, where we tried to look different topics. And but also here, the idea is that the text could be the footnote to the artwork, or the artwork could be also the footnote to the text of Estelle. So again, an exhibition that you can navigate as a hypertext. Here a picture from the Kunsthistorisches Institut Phototec. And for example, we tried to understand how next development of the future, in fact, culturally began already with the invention of photography, or in the 1920s with the invention of microfilm. Anyhow, here what you see, you could also say that the space of the Phototec at the Kunsthistorisches Institut was already at the very beginning a virtual space where the art historians came to Florence but didn't need to go anymore to the church, the museum. They could just extract the cards, put them on the table, and recombine their own virtual research space. What is now possible with Google Map. Or what is also very interesting, that the concept of metadata here in this picture that was acquired by a gallery and then is now part of the Phototec, has many also hidden metadata. For example, here these codes were used also by agents that were in London that would sell these mirrors in London to have the price codes embedded. Here the installation where we bring all these different elements together. One of the objects we show is this issue of Life magazine, where Vannevar Bash presented in this article, as we may think, a kind of pre-Google glass system, or the Memex that would be a kind of Wikipedia or interaction memory humanity memory machine using microfilm or film to interact. So for us, it's important to present that what we think is now contemporary, in fact, started already about 1 century ago. Or, for example, that Rekordak was a sub-company of Kodak, and that already in the 1920s, all libraries in the United States were digitalized. And so information could be circulate between space. One of the questions is also how to protect this memory. Here we are at the National Storage Company, 1950. That was, as I told, a subsidiary of Kodak. It's a place that still exists, Iron Mountain in Pennsylvania, an ex-mining site, where now big multinationals keep all their files and microfilms, but also, for example, Sony Music has all the tapes from its record, or all multinationals have their film, but also the insurance company have their file stocked. Here we are at the site where Corbis and Getty images that were bought at the time by Bill Gates of Microsoft, and now is in the meantime sold to a Chinese investment company, keep basically all the memory of the USA or American imaginary, or we could say the Western imaginary, more than 15 million of negative from photographic companies, from photographic agencies. And also one interesting point is that maybe George Eastman himself started as the founder of Kodak, started as a banker. So microfilm was also used to register economical checkings. Or we look also how imaging now is used now to look at complex three-dimensional or time complex events, like here we are at CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider. So the question is how to handle this large mass of images of these very complex, you could say, photographic cameras of events, but also how this question of handling large a mass of images started already in the 60s with bubble chamber using negatives, or the question of how to look at large numbers of nuclear emulsions. Here you see, let's say, a scanning lady that would try in these first machines developed in the 60s to inscribe the choreography of physical events into punch cards that then were given to computers, and the computer would then give back to the human the information on what event should be more interesting to look. So in a certain way, the beginning of machine learning. Or here we are at the Orchids greenhouse, a fieldwork we just did with the Delft University. In this place, 7 million of orchids are produced every year. And at the end of the process, there is a photographic studio where the artificial intelligence decides which price the flower should have and in which direction it should be sold in Europe, accordingly to its aesthetics quality. Maybe, yeah, time is going. I just want to show maybe one last thing. We are also asking ourselves now how basically reality is, say, photography had the function of document reality, but now imaging technology define reality. Here we are, is a picture of a supercomputer in Stuttgart where they have a 3D digital theater. So for the automotive industry, marketing, a marketing specialist, an engineer and designer can come together and they can change in real time with a supercomputer for example, the mirror, and they know, okay, we have to inject so much plastic, so the new mirror will cost that much more, or it will have this influence on the flow of air, or the statics will be different. And the same now with Notre Dame, with the reconstruction of Notre Dame, different sets of, including eventually also the video game Assassin's Creed, will be used to reconstruct Notre Dame. So again, visualization that creates reality. 1 minute more, a project that will be presented at Haus der Kultur und Welt in May, and I worked with Giulia Bruno, a photographer and biologist, together with 15 groups that were financed by Haus der Kultur und der Welt. So it's also interesting that cultural institutions finance a group of scientists to work on different cores, mud, corals, ice, that might be used to define the new, a new geological era that might be the Anthropocene after the Holocene. And basically we asked now, during lockdown, scientists to make a logbook of their work in a certain way to create history while or memory of history while history is happening. So these are pictures that are really in the process of happening. Thank you very much.
Who has a question? Yeah.
Did I understand right that a Chinese company bought the knowledge?
So it's a Chinese investment group that bought, now there should be here Estelle that studied this for a long time, for about 2 years, but so basically what happened is that in the 80s and 90s, Bill Gates bought, or let's say Microsoft company bought a lot of different photographic agencies with the idea to create a central knowledge of images and also a lot of art images. So Bill Gates had also this house on the lake in which the idea was a little bit like iTunes. You would project images on the wall and have artworks that would change. Maybe a little bit like iTunes for art, but before, then it didn't work out. Or this fantasy of digitalization, or maybe it was too early. And of course now the idea of magazines doesn't work also anymore, the classical editorial idea. So all these classical photographic agencies have economical problems, and Corbis was then bought by Chinese investment groups, Chinese investment company. So also the picture of Tiananmen now is owned by a Chinese company.
So I think we are all deeply impressed and somehow troubled how naive we are towards the image that are so much part of our life, and where do they come from? How far does it go into all these different questions, disciplines, stories, histories? Other questions? Quick one. Yeah.
Well, we had here some time ago the group Forensic Architecture. And that goes a little bit in the same direction as you're working. And I just, a very brief question, are you also working in this field or not?
Not directly as an activist, let's say, like maybe Eyal would do. I collaborated also with Eyal and Alessandro Petti with decolonizing architecture. So, of course, there is a lot of, let's say, this collective learning or I learned a lot also from their practice. But in a certain way, it's a more analytic way, or it's more to create to look at a set of process to then start and trigger a dialogue, not the directly activistic maybe attitude, but of course there is the idea that you can give voice maybe to parts that normally don't have a voice. For example, in Prospecting Oceans, the main installation film ends in the end. We went all the way to the Bismarck Sea. That is also interesting that it's a German name. In Papua New Guinea, where there was the tentative 3 years ago to make the first mining, ocean mining. So we try to give voice to the local communities, exactly as we try to give voice to the lawyers at the International Seabed Authority and bring them together in the film, so create ideal dialogues.
Another big round of applause for Armin Linke.
Take my control.